Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. It's an honor to stand to join this debate because, as the minority leader indicated, this truly is a momentous occasion. And it is one that I hope will get us closer to where we need to be as it relates to Tobago, getting the mechanism that would allow us true self-determination. Madam Presiding Officer, though, I would like to start by just doing something that might actually be a little bit out of character for myself. I want to go back a little bit and discuss a little bit of history so that we could get some context of where we are. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to draw our attention to the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the 9th of March 2018, where the Honorable Keith Rowley laid the constitutional amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2018, and it was an act to amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to accord self-government to Tobago, to repeal the Tobago House of Assembly Act, Chapter 2503, and for related matters. As I said, Madam Presiding Officer, this was in March the 18th. Madam Presiding Officer, coincidentally, when the Honorable Keith Rowley laid that bill, he also presented a very lengthy statement. And that statement, Madam Presiding Officer, while it is on the Hansard of the Parliament, it is also on the Office of the Prime Minister's page, as in website. And it says here, the history, evolution, and current status of internal self-government for Tobago is the title of the paper that he presented. A statement by Prime Minister the Honorable Keith Rowley at the 21st sitting of the House of Representatives today. Back then it was Friday the 9th of March 2019. Now it's a pretty lengthy document, Madam Presiding Officer, so I won't go through it. But it actually is a very good for those of us who are interested in understanding the history of this Tobago self-determination struggle. It is actually quite a good history lesson. So I would really encourage everyone to go back and to read exactly what the Prime Minister then said. Because it speaks about the history of Trinidad and Tobago, the evolution post-independence. It speaks about the Simongal Bill, how we actually got to the bills, the acts that we have now. It also speaks about the Green Paper in 2012 and the public consultations that happened on the Green Paper. It also speaks about the THA Commission in 2012 and so forth. I mean, it goes into quite a detailed document. It speaks about the Constitution Amendment Bill of 2013, the same bills that the members were talking about and so forth. And it also speaks about the brief review of the establishment of the Forum of Political Leaders, something that the member also spoke about a bit. But I want to read in particular, Madam Presiding Officer, where it says, following the formation of the Forum of Political Leaders, it says, more than 40 meetings were held with groups, individuals, and sectors throughout Tobago and in Trinidad from January 2014, Madam Presiding Officer, to October 2016. After several public meetings, public consultations, and public education programs, the convention was held on the 14th of September 2014 at Signal Hill Secondary School. A number of the issues were identified as fundamental to an equitable relationship between the two islands in the sovereign democratic nation of Trinidad and Tobago. These were, and he outlines 4 of them. A, equality of status between the two islands and a legislative framework reflecting such equality. I repeat, equality of status between the two islands, right? B, a federal type system of governance. C, definition and delineation of the boundaries of each island in accordance with the Constitution. And D, Madam Presiding Officer, the responsibility of the Tobago administration to formulate and implement policy on all matters affecting the lives of Tobago, the lives of people resident in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. And it continues, following the convention, a comprehensive report was submitted by the Secretariat, which recorded the series of consultations conducted, and it ends with basically saying, so many of these things happened. The election happened in 2015. It spoke about what the PNM manifesto said in 2015, which included, by the way, engaging the national government to facilitate efforts to achieve democratic self-government for Tobago in keeping with the aspirations of the people of Tobago, and so forth. He then says, later down, that he made an announcement while he was attending a function at Bishop's High School in 2015, and he spoke about his commitment to continuing this process and so forth. In the end, Madam Presiding Officer, he spoke about the fact that the forum, no, let me go back a little bit. A briefing document entitled Tobago's Position on its Right to Self-Determination was dispatched to me as the new Prime Minister in January 2016, Madam Presiding Officer. The services of several individuals, including Mr. Gilbert Peterson, Ingrid Melville, and a couple others were part of it, and they held a convention that happened in Lambo in 2016. The forum proceeded to draft legislation to accomplish the deliverables outlined in the resolution in the September convention. They included having 27 meetings among members of the forum and included, in essence, plenty talking happened in Tobago to get us to this point. It says, oh, these discussions resulted in the creation of 2 draft constitution amendment bills. In essence, there was a Bill A and a Bill B. And then it says, after such extensive consultations and the achievement of consensus, the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, the Honorable Orville London, piloted a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to accord self-governance to Tobago and for matters incidental to at the 48th sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly in the 2013-2017 session, which was held on the 27th of October, 2017. The bill was unanimously passed in the House, and the then Chief Secretary, Mr. Orville London, in essence, sent the bill to Trinidad. These are the words of the Prime Minister, in essence, as he was laying. The final part of what he says is current status. The Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill was developed after a very long and transparent process of research, extensive public consultations, and a genuine desire to advance and improve the process of granting further autonomy to the island of Tobago within the context of the sovereign democratic state of Trinidad and Tobago. The bill was submitted to Cabinet and is hereby presented to the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, this Honorable House, as the aspiration of the people of Tobago. This is what the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley said at that time. If you go back to the parliamentary website and you click on the links, it will take you to the bill that the Honorable Keith Rowley presented at that time. And I just want to highlight a couple of the areas of importance of that bill, Madam Presiding Officer. Section 5 said the Constitution is amended for inserting after Section 1 the following section. 1A, there shall be equality of status between the island of Trinidad and the island of Tobago within the sovereign democratic state. And I'm stressing the word island because we are talking about equality of status between the island, Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer. Again, let me very quickly go through another piece that was critical. Again, if you go to the link, this is I literally downloaded it yesterday, Madam Presiding Officer. The Tobago Statute shall have in effect in Tobago Little Tobago, St. Giles, Marbles Island, Goat Island, Sister Island, and such areas of the archipelagic waters of Trinidad and Tobago, including any islands, the seabed, and the subsoil that lies within 11 miles from the low water mark of Tobago. So that document spoke about 11 miles from the low water mark of Tobago. So in essence, all are we, everything that is the island and 11 nautical miles going out. It also spoke about, coincidentally, Madam Presiding Officer having 15 assemblymen, which may have been where that came from when we made that change, what was it, 2021, to break the deadlock, and the councillors. It also included, Madam Presiding Officer, this is important because the member, the minority leader, spoke about the importance of the Fiscal Review Commission. Fiscal, not physical. Fiscal Review Commission. And it would have included the chairman of the Fiscal Review Commission, who shall be appointed by the President in his discretion after consultation with the Chief Sec and the Prime Minister. The Fiscal Review Commission would have also included 2 members appointed by the Tobago Executive Council and 2 members appointed by the Cabinet. So if you read that carefully, that's 5 members. 1, who is the chair, and 2 from Cabinet, 2 from Tobago, right? So that was a 5-member committee known as the Fiscal Review Commission. So, this is a document. This is the bill that when you click on the Hansard on the office of on the parliamentary website, Madam Presiding Officer, this is the document that is there. We, of course, did not hear anything about this for quite some time after. For long after, Madam Presiding Officer. And I would just ask Tobagonians to consider the fact that every time we seem to hear about this, coincidentally just happens to be just before an election time. But that's okay, Madam Presiding Officer, because as I said at the beginning, I'm actually excited by the fact that we are here now doing this because it means we are going a step further. And, you know, unless the election is called next week, the general election, you know, maybe this is not in the middle of election season and the general election will not be until, well, I guess the senator said, what, 2026? So maybe this time we are wrong. But we're hoping. But Madam Presiding Officer, it's important to note that for a long time after, we had not heard anything about that until, as a member of the House in 2021, I received an email, June 1st, 2021, at 8:24 p.m., and the subject was meeting invitation, Friday, 4th of June, 2021 at 3 p.m. Dr. B. Israel, I write on behalf of the GSC Constitutional Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2020, I have been directed to invite the Forum of Political Leaders in Tobago and assembly persons to the next meeting of the committee to be held virtually on June the 4th. So remember, this email came on June the 1st, and the meeting would have been, Madam Presiding Officer, on June the 4th. So we thought, great, good, you know, it moving, finally. We assumed, for example, that the documents that we were talking about would have been the documents that were on the parliamentary website, Madam Presiding Officer, because that is the document we are talking about. I am thinking now, though, as I listen to the minority leader, that, you know, there may also be other documents somewhere else that the minority leader has access to that the rest of us do not have access to. And if the rest of us do not have access to it, it means that the average Tobagonian does not have access to it, which makes it even more difficult to agree to something that we do not even know what is in the document. But anyway, I digress, Madam Presiding Officer. So we were preparing, you know, excited to go to this June 4th meeting, Madam Presiding Officer. And then on Thursday, June 3rd at 8:06 p.m., I get another email. Remember, Madam Presiding Officer, the meeting that we are to go to is on the 4th. And on the 3rd at 8:06 p.m., Madam Presiding Officer, there's another email that came, and that email said, Dear Dr. Faith B. Israel, on behalf of the committee, blah, blah, blah. Basically, here attached, please find attached the bills that we will be discussing at the meeting tomorrow. Madam Presiding Officer, 8:06, the night before the meeting. The third. The meeting is the 4th. 8:06, the night of the 3rd is when I got that meeting of June. Madam Presiding Officer. So because, maybe in that time we were not in the executive, we really didn't have plenty of things to do. At 8:06 p.m., we all said, oh, wow, look at this new document. Let me open it before we go to the meeting tomorrow. Only to open the document, Madam Presiding Officer, to realize that the document that was sent in that email at 8:06 p.m. are documents that look very different to the one we thought we were going to be having a discussion about, Madam Presiding Officer. So when we started reading, Madam Presiding Officer, we recognized that we were going to be working with two documents. The minority leader rightly described them. The first is the Constitution Amendment, Tobago Self-Government Bill. And as the minority leader said, this was to amend the Constitution. And as the minority leader rightly said, amending the Constitution requires a special majority, meaning you need 3/5 and 2/3 to get it done, which is wonderful. Which means, Madam Presiding Officer, that any time you need, because the Constitution is such a weighted document, it cannot be changed flippantly. You need people to come together. You need the government, the whole of government, to come together in essence to agree on those changes. The whole of Parliament. Thank you for that correction. So when we started reading, Madam Presiding Officer, that first document, I remember this is the one, Madam Presiding Officer, that requires the whole of Parliament, in essence, to agree to. We recognized very quickly preamble number 4, where it says the preamble of the Constitution is amended by inserting after the following. It speaks to yes, as the minority leader did highlight, recognizing the right of self-determination of the people of Tobago. The minority leader flippantly went over, though, the other part that says, recognize the equality of status between the people of the island of Trinidad and the people of the island of Tobago, enabling them fair access. Madam Presiding Officer, if we go back to what everything the people of Tobago have actually said before, we did not have any concern about, as people, not having fair access, or as people not being equal to Trinidadians. That was never the concern, Madam Presiding Officer. What we have always asked for is equality of status between the island Trinidad and the island Tobago, not the people in the island in Trinidad and the people in the island in Tobago. So we looked at this and we thought, wow, if we put this, Madam Presiding Officer, in the Constitution, it means that it will take the whole of Parliament again to change it. And we were very, very clear that that was one of the areas we did not want in the Constitution in particular, because that is not what the people of Tobago said it wanted, Madam Presiding Officer. It also included, for the purposes of several sections, and those are the sections, Madam Presiding Officer, that treat with lawmaking powers in essence, a reference to Tobago, because, if we're talking about making laws for Tobago, we need to define what we mean by when we say the word Tobago. With reference to Tobago, it means the island of Tobago, Little Tobago, St. Giles Island, Marble Island, Goat Island, Sister Island, and the internal and inland waters of Tobago. Internal and inland waters in Tobago. And I really, really wish the minority leader was in here to hear me explain. So when I say that the document took away the water outside, it's because the document actually said internal and inland waters, which by any reasonable deduction means that the 6 nautical miles, for example, that the current Tobago House of Assembly Act gives us would have been taken away, because it specifically said internal and inland waters, Madam Presiding Officer. And that, of course, we had a significant challenge with, because those of us who know anything about what is going on out there, we remember hearing Our older folks talk about seeing the flares that are going up, the flares that are going up in the waters around Tobago. And I understand that there was actually a past chief secretary who said, nah, don't worry about that, it ain't nothing going on out there. But we are seeing it. Our fishermen are telling us there's stuff happening out there. I mean, I may never see it because I'm not going out on a pirogue to go and see it. But there are things happening out there and there are flares going up, and it is in the waters that are close, Madam Presiding Officer, to Tobago. So, it says, Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to lawmaking powers, and again, I go back to the fact that these are the things that were going to be in the Constitution. That is a critical part. Because it means that if we got this into the Constitution, it would have been kind of very, very, very difficult to get them out. It says, Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to lawmaking powers, that is section 53 of the Constitution, would be amended to basically give Tobago, and which we really appreciate, the Tobago Legislature would make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Tobago with respect to the matters prescribed, which we absolutely wonderful, amazing. But it also says, Madam Presiding Officer, Part 6, at any time, meaning whenever, when is expressed, declared in any act passed by the Parliament that a provision of that act being a provision that relates to a matter prescribed under Section 2, as it relates to Tobago, meaning as it affects Tobago, the interests of external affairs, the interests of national security, relation to the state of public emergency, relation to national financial crisis, that the Parliament, the Cabinet, those on the other side would be able, whatever their law is, would supersede ours. Now, the thing about that is most of that may not have been an issue, but for example, when they talk about state of public emergency, is it that, for example, the oil spill would have been a state of public emergency? And because it said at any time, we were not the ones who were deciding. See if the document included a definition, for example, of when we say emergency, what we're talking about, we would have limited, or we would have a better understanding of what that means. So those were some of the areas, Madam Presiding Officer, that would have been in the Constitution Amendment Bill. The Tobago Island Government Bill also included very, very detailed prescriptions, Madam Presiding Officer. And the learned individuals at that time were basically saying, you know, some of the things we are going back and forth about, some of the things are not perfect. It may actually work better for us to just have a broad thing that says, Tobago, you have the authority to create your own governance, and then allow the people of Tobago to come back and say whether it wants, for example, the People's House, whether it wants a Senate, whether it wants whatever those things are, a bicameral system. That was one of the things that came up at that time, even before that time, that we needed to take into consideration. Something else, Madam Presiding Officer, that the minority leader so eloquently spoke about is this idea of the 6.8% of the total appropriation by Parliament. And that in a fiscal year, or such other percentage to be determined by the Fiscal Review Committee, right? The Fiscal Review Committee. So we thought, you know, let us go into this. We can't get everything that we want. That is fine. Let us see, you know, even though right now the current Dispute Resolution Commission gives us up to the 6.9%, but we understand the argument about being 6.8 at minimum, but it will have to go to this Fiscal Review Commission. And we kept reading, only to realize that the Fiscal Review Committee, remember the first one we said, included the chairman, who the president in essence had to pick, and then 2 members from the THA, 2 members from the cabinet, from central government. This document then says that there shall be established a Fiscal Review Committee which shall comprise, Madam Presiding Officer, a chairman who shall be the minister with responsibility for finance, a deputy chair who shall be the secretary with responsibility for finance, one member appointed by the Tobago Executive Council, so that is 1, 2, 3 people, yeah, and 2 members appointed by the cabinet. So we now have a fiscal review committee, Madam Presiding Officer, that is now heavily lopsided.
Member, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And we thought to ourselves, the minister is already the chair. Sure, the vice chair would be the secretary, 1 other person from the THE, and 2 people from the cabinet. So we would have already had a fiscal review committee that already, they didn't even have to listen to us, Madam Presiding Officer. They could have already voted to say 0, zilch, nothing more for Olia, because that is what the fiscal review committee came up with. Madam Presiding Officer, there are several other things that are a part of this document that we looked at on the 3rd of June, going into the meeting on the 4th of June. And this is what gave us on the 4th of June the impetus to say to the Joint Select Committee back then, 1, we appreciate this conversation, Madam Presiding Officer, but 2, these 2 documents that you all are coming with are not the documents that we thought we were going to come to this meeting with, because these are not the documents that our dear Prime Minister was speaking about back then. In particularly since, Madam Presiding Officer, the Prime Minister, in his words, indicated that he understood the key things that the people of Tobago, after all of those months and months and months and years and years and years and meetings and meetings and meetings, said that we wanted, Madam Presiding Officer. And these were non-negotiable. As a matter of fact, he is the one who indicated that these were the things that were non-negotiable. These were the things that the people of Tobago, he said he's a proud Tobagonian, Madam Presiding Officer. These were the things that proud Tobagonian acknowledged that we needed. So, Madam Presiding Officer, it is passing strange, Madam Presiding Officer, that we are here again at this point, on the heels, or maybe not on the heels, of a general election, on the heels and maybe not on the heels of a Tobago House of Assembly election, because we understand that there may be a plot to have this passed, which will then force the Tobago House of Assembly to come to an end, which will then make this to be on the heels of a Tobago House of Assembly election, rather than the general, Madam Presiding Officer. If that is indeed the case, it is unfortunate, Madam Presiding Officer, that this House is being asked to vote on behalf of the people of Tobago by the minority leader to agree on a motion that explicitly states that there are things in the bills that are in the House down there now that we actively do not want, Madam Presiding Officer. And I am going to say to Tobago and Tobagonians, Madam Presiding Officer, that you should never forgive the people who are trying to hoodwink you, and the people who are trying to say to you that all you're stupid.
Member.
Retracted, Madam Presiding
Thank
Officer. The people who are trying to say to you that all of the meetings you went to and all of the consultations that you went to and all of those things. And because of that, Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to place on record that the members of the executive are making or going to propose an amendment to the bill, to the motion, Madam Presiding Officer. And that amendment, Madam Presiding Officer, will include a couple shifts. The first amendment to the 3rd recital includes leaving out the word 3 and inserting the word 5, Madam Presiding Officer. The second amendment to the 4th recital, the words proposed are bills to grant Tobago the long denied autonomy will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament be inserted after the word that, and the words constitutional amendment Tobago self-government be left out completely, Madam Presiding Officer, that the third amendment be to the fifth recital, and that proposes to include the word should before the word represent, and that the fourth amendment is to the last resolution, and we propose to insert the words with necessary amendments and leave out the words without further amendments, Madam Presiding Officer. With that, I ask those of us, all right-thinking Tobagonians, to not allow the promise of a little bit to be dangled in front of you while they are taking away everything in the back of you and thinking that you are not smart, Madam Presiding Officer. With that, I thank you.